Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dr. Fundi. I'm the host of the Dr. Fundi Show. It's been a long time. It's been almost 4 months of not interacting with you. You know, from time to time, one needs to take a sabbatical just to go and recharge one's batteries. Because, you know, I've been doing this work from the beginning of 2020, and I never really got a break. And, you know, from around April this year, I could feel that there was very little energy in me, and I needed to just take a break on a number of things that I was doing so that I can go back to recharge and come back fresher. So today, being the first weekend of September, which is known as the Heritage Month in South Africa, I thought there's no better way to come back than to have an interview that has got relevance to matters of our heritage as the African people. Today, I've got a very, very interesting guest, Mr. Anele Siswana. I'm going to introduce him properly, but before I do so, let me just welcome all of you who have joined us on this live stream via YouTube, via Instagram, and also via our official Facebook page. We're going to have about 60 to 75 minutes of interesting conversation with Mr. Siswana. Now, who is Mr. Siswana? He is a very dynamic young man who is a qualified clinical psychologist in private practice. He's in private practice here in Johannesburg. You know, but what also makes him interesting is the fact that he's not only a conventional clinical psychologist, he also has accepted the ancestral calling, undertook or underwent the necessary training, that is ukutwasa, under ukobela, that is, you know, a principal who has been practicing you know, as a traditional healer or divine healer for some time. So he went through that process. So he's also a fully fledged divine healer. He's one of our leading thinkers when it comes to matters of African spirituality. And so I am looking forward, you know, to sharing with you, you know, the wisdom, the experience, the insights that he has, both as a clinical psychologist and also as a divine healer. He also does a lot of talks in different forums on matters of the LGBTQIA, the rights of the people, you know, with LGBTQIA. So, but our focus really being Heritage Month is on matters of African spirituality in the context of somebody who has been trained as a conventional clinical psychologist. So, Mr. Anele Siswana, welcome.
Great to be invited by you, Dr. Nyati. I look forward to this beautiful and interesting conversation.
Yeah, man, you must relax. I don't do serious stuff here. I want us to be
very relaxed. I'm very relaxed.
I want us to be relaxed. You know, look at this doctor telling a clinical psychologist to be relaxed. You know, it should be the other way around.
Yeah.
All right. So I just want us to spend about 5-10 minutes, just a little bit about who is Anele, not your professional side, not your, you know, but just who is Anele. you know, ubuyaphi, ukhuliswe kanjani, you know, just to get a sense of the kind of family that you come from. Because when we now touch on matters of African spirituality, we need to have a little bit of a base. What kind of family did you grow up in? Was it a just pure Christian family? Or was it a family that actually did African spirituality stuff and also were Christian? You know, and also, you know, were there people in your family who have been, you know, called to be traditional healers in the past? But let's start with that, just to give a sense to people. Anele, Gubani.
All right, so it's very interesting to draw on my lineage as to actually who am I, because I use different aspects to kind of draw into that. But the simplest way, the Zalelwe Epai, that's where I was born in Port Elizabeth, but I spent
Fundi.
by kwaZakhele Kulati.
Yes.
kwaZakhele Kulati. But because of impangelo kamama, I had to move to Mount Fred to live with umakhulu. Mount Fred. So I spent quite 6 years of my life no makhulu, and interestingly, Dr. Nyati, the most memories I have is my memories with umakhulu. And umakhulu waeli, that is, she was a divine healer. Yes. And so all the kindness of fond memories I remember going for Intombe, basically these traditional dances and rituals that Makulu used to attend. So I've got quite a vivid memory around that. But my grandmother played a very significant part in my early formation and development as a child. So Numdana Makulu, you know. Yeah, if you're raised by a grandmother, you know the kind of being spoiled by your grandmother. So subsequent to that, I then needed to move to PE to live with my mother. Unfortunately, I don't have much to recall about my dad, even though he was quite involved until a certain time things in life happened. So since then, grew up in PE, did my primary education, AKK. I also went to Henry Ngenza, which is in the same vicinity. From there, I went to KwaZakhele High School. From KwaZakhele High School, I went to Nelson Mandela University. But there's a lot of stuff that happened in my childhood. Something that I like to mention to people, that at quite a young age, I had an unfortunate situation. I was hit by a car, a hit and run, and it really affected me, the left side of my brain. That is, I ended up developing temporal lobe epilepsy, which was undiagnosed until the age of 27. And it happened out of that situation. I then developed ADHD, but also it was undiagnosed. So I've always had to live with these neurological and psychological problems that were never understood. As a result, I struggled with hearing from childhood. It was kind of partial hearing problem. I struggled with concentration, attention, and memory. As a result, people thought I was slightly disabled because I was quite an odd child. And I believe that incident shaped a lot of my intellectual capacity, but also how I then changed, because I'm described as a child that was very moody post the accident. And kind of withdrawn and all of that. So I had to repeat my grade 1 as a result of that accident. And school, Dr. Nyati, has always been my greatest difficulty. As a result, because school was difficult, I am told at home I used to make a lot of excuses. And only to discover that now that it was not because I hated school, but I hated the fact that I was dumb. I hated the fact that I was a slow learner, always the last learner to kind of complete tasks and that. So that was my struggle. And throughout my life, there was always this thing at the background of my life, that I knew there was something different about me. about my attractions for other boys. But at
Yeah.
that time, I didn't really make sense as to what was this about exactly.
Yes. Yes.
Then I like, you know what? These are just, I don't know what this thought was. Just one specific boy I used to have butterflies about. I didn't even know what was that about. And until I got to varsity, no, until I got to high school, then I realized, oh, there's something called gay, meaning you are physically and sexually or emotionally attracted to people of your same sex. Like, oh, okay, clearly this is what I've always struggled for the longest of time. But I want to highlight this, and actually, I'm going to write this on my autobiography that I'm writing at the moment, and more like to be a memoir. I had an unfortunate situation. I was sexually molested at the age of 13.
Yes.
And I never told
This
anyone.
is another big incident in your early years. Because your first incident was the accident.
The accident, yeah.
You know, that you had, which left you with some residual damage, you know, some trauma to your brain and the temporal lobe epilepsy and the psycho-emotional issues relating to that.
Yeah.
And now this is the second one now. This is a traumatic
Major
incident. This is a major traumatic incident that happened to you at the age of 13, right?
Yeah. It happened right through until probably 15.
Yeah.
And the kind of thing that was an issue here, my abuser was a close relative, not direct, but there were also incentives in the process of that. So he used to pull me with a lot of money. And it happened because I was quiet as well and I was quite a reserved child. I never really opened up to it up until later in life. Even then, till today, no one at home knows about the difficulties and intricacies of that.
Yeah.
But since
is the abuser still, you know, around in the family?
Yeah.
You know,
yeah, I know him. I see him occasionally. I would want to one day sit down with him and actually ask, what were you doing? But I have gone through quite extensive psychotherapy to try and address this issue, because at some point, I think this is what a number of young boys, and not to say that a number of them could be gay, because my issue was, had I been comfortable with my sexual identity and sexual orientation, had it not been for the sexual assault, or not assault, basically, I call it for the rape that happened to me. Yeah. And why is it that he found it easy for me, for him to do what he did to me? Yeah. So I grew up with all of those questions, but there was always this reservation that even prior, in my understanding, I've always had attractions for other boys, but I didn't have the name and the climax of that when it came to the sexual abuse. Yeah. So there was a conflict between the sex itself as abuse and what it did to the mind of a 13-year-old that then had to struggle with identity in the process of that.
And I mean, that's a very, very critical time in one's development. Well, that's teenagehood.
Yeah.
You know, very, very critical time. And I mean, as a psychologist, when you know the different critical times, you know, in the development of you know of a human being. I mean, even if we go to the Freud's, stages, you know, of psychosexual development, you know, but if something happens at a particular critical stage, it may have an impact such that later on in life, you may then, you know, manifest or present in a particular way. But anyway, let you to continue with.
So exactly the way that you're describing it, and thanks to have studied psychology, because I then had a bit of myself and understanding psychosocial environmental factors that contributed to my formation, to the point that I think in my early 20s, I kind of reconciled my sexual identity and fully accepted it. over time, but understood that it happened to have been an unfortunate circumstance around what happened to me.
It was an environment issue, you know.
It was an environment issue.
It was an environment issue that triggered, you know, the situation, and you went through a period of confusion, you know, about what was happening. But then in your early 20s, you reconciled.
Yeah, I reconciled. So I suppose a lot of my trauma sits in my childhood. As a result, only now, again, later in my late 20s and my early 30s, that I kind of consolidated my identity and self-confidence. I really struggled with self-esteem and confidence throughout my childhood because I had these deficits.
Yes.
And in my mind, I had a lot of inabilities and things that I couldn't do. I mean, I was always rejected by girls. I was trying to figure things out. At school, I was not doing the best. Until I would always be grateful to one of my class teachers, Mr. Gola from Kwazakela High School, that identified me for public speaking and that's when I harnessed my ability to speak. That was the only thing I could trust myself. Academically, I knew I'm not the best. And when it came to my career decision making, I had three options. On one option, I wanted to be a public relations officer. But you know that thing at Dala, I only have a degree, and I was told there's no degree, there's a diploma in PR. And Nelson Mandela University, like, no, and the phone degree. So I wanted to major in provocative journalism or public relations, but I didn't meet the points. And so my second choice was theology. I wanted to study theology so that I can be Fundi. But the challenging thing was like the name and the gay. So I was seven. Then the third option was psychology. And for some reason, I didn't meet the points, but it's actually by God's grace, I needed to be a psychologist. And since then, I never failed. So psychology was my third option. And throughout, that's when I got to understand more of what psychology is about. And to this day and age, I would always say a bigger part of my development was shaped by Ukulu Makulu. And coming from a very big family, in PE, my mother I can safely diagnose her as a worst empath ever. Because and I reflect about this in my
work. Kind of empath who's got no limits.
It's sympathy that it's pathological sympathy. I always say that. But it really shaped my views of how to be and understand people, because only now I'm also teaching myself boundaries of what to do. As the
I was about to say that, you know, sometimes we joke about it or we put memes on social media. We talk about empaths who don't have boundaries, yet those who get and receive the benefits from the empath, sometimes they don't stop asking. So you need to at some point be able to say, you know, for now this is enough. I also need to, you know, make sure that in the process of me embracing everybody based on their stories and their circumstances, bringing them ekaya, I hope I'm not in the process affecting abantwana bam, you know, they have less and less of either my time or attention, or actually, you know, other benefits.
So I think of that. I live in a 4-bedroom house, and we only two. It's me and my partner, and the phone space is contaminated. And I realized it's one of the traumas I had in my childhood. I didn't have space for solitude. You know, a guy we put out 20 plates, and I never understood. And now, if you hear the silence in my house, this is what I want. I make sure that I live in a very quiet place, and I don't want movement in my place, because I suppose it's one of those things that somehow have a traumatic kind of way of I just like my
Okay.
space and my peace.
So, but there's a question you did not answer me on though, which I think is still critical. In matters of religion and spirituality,
I'm still coming there.
I want us to move from then. Psychology. You know, already you've spoken about how you chose that as your third choice, but how it actually links up with some of the things that gave you insights about what happened in your early life. You know, so but let's just go back to the matter of the religion and spirituality, because in the book, in the article you sent me yesterday, you talked about a number of things. You said, I've always understood the intersectionality of religion, spiritualism, sexuality, and identity. Yeah. So, but I'm just focusing on the religion, spirituality part. Okay.
So Ekaya, there's two traditions. There's one tradition from my maternal side, that is Amatolo, Otangamanta, Omkenge, Omguni, that side of my family. They were Methodist. Most by tradition, Umakulu, Ukokogazi, Namakosa. That's why I tell Namakosa. My great grandmother was Namakosa. So it turns out that Umakulu were Umwesel. So there's a strong Methodist history in my family, similar to my dad's side. That is, they're all Methodist. So, but Umakulu, because of Uktwasa in her journey, she then had to resort to Ikawa that would accommodate space. Yes, it's
they call them African Pentecostal churches. Yeah.
You know? So then she moved to that. And then also my mom, and then more Volizan, because my mother as well is a healer, even though she never completed her processes. So eventually my spirituality at home drew from Methodism as well as Zion. But there was a thing at home on both sides of the family, but strongly on my maternal side of the family, that we did everything that spirituality, that looks like spirituality, but there was a strong emphasis on African spirituality and its expressions. So for me, God was never introduced.
Benenza upahla and pray. I normally say to people, P and P.
We slaughter, we do all kind of African traditional rituals, which is we observe them. So it was never something that is dichotomous, that Jesus and church or God are kind of separated people. They were considered as one. So my spirituality from that. But also what I discovered is that at home, there's a strong lineage of Amagriha. That is traditional healers, which from my maternal side traces from my great-grandmother, Mama Kosa, my grandmother, Mama Galega, as well as my mother, and many others who then have to follow this gift. But the trajectory of what I see this gift, it has always been more like psychic mediums. Because Umakulu, I can safely say, in the way I understand now, my Kukokogas, she was a psychic medium. So a lot of what I am today, which will unpack it further, I see things before they happen. I am a dreamer. I dream a lot. I'm quite prophetic in the way of how I see things and how I say things sometimes without even me knowing. But there's a strong healing gift in my family, less to do with herbs. Whereas on my father's side, but from my mother's side, it has a lot to do with healing for people, has a lot to do with the kind of work that I'm doing. So to answer you, Dr. Nyati, is that spirituality for me was never introduced as a dichotomous thing. I've always seen it as one. So we would pray, we would slaughter, but in every ritual, Umakolo would pray to acknowledge Umvelingangi, as the anchor of it all of our faith. So my faith, my theology has always been intertwined and intersectional with African spirituality.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. So you have that base, because in the same article, they are talking about a certain Kenzani who was in a family that had that dichotomy. And as a result, acknowledging and actually accepting the calling was a big challenge, because it was seen as something as that is backwards, something that is evil and all of those things. So in your family, there was this easy integration, what other people refer to as syncretism, when you have a belief in more than one form of religion or spirituality, and other people, they talk of omnism, where you're saying no one religion has got all the answers to the issues of the world. So wena uyincancile basically, uyicacile and umakhulu naye wongeza, so you are part of that lineage. Right? So as we are then talking today, it's Heritage Month in South Africa, and it's about us retracing and embracing the who we are. You talk a lot in different forums about matters of African spirituality, right? Now just for the uninitiated, what is your understanding of what African spirituality is?
For me, what I've kind of simplified African spirituality to be, it's expressions of God in a cultured way. What I mean by that, African people from ancient times have always had their own expressions of who God is and how they understood God to be. Hence, we've got indigenous names, Utiko, Ukamata, Umvelingangi, Modimo, because that's how ancient people knew that there was a supernatural power.
A higher
then
power.
Colonization came. It introduced that which indigenous people or Abantu Bakdala knew as Ukamata, and they brought a different language capital to name it as God, right? But the kind of God that was then introduced with the arrival of colonization and colonizers is that this can only be true when we speak of God, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit using a Christian lens. Whereas Abantu Badala, in ancient times and over times, their theology was centered on God, nature, and those who have transcended. So there's a lot to do in African spirituality with Indalo and nature. And part of that nature being those who have departed, but they've transcended into a different realm, which we then now call Abapanza, Amadus, or Amatong. So in ancient times, there was God, there was nature, there was Amatong. However, then now people were then told that this is a wrong method. You should then find this view of understanding spirituality, faith, and theology and doctrine within this particular lens. So now, in my view of rethinking of what African spirituality is, people have a mistake, Dr. Nyat, of thinking that African expressions of faith and spirituality are African spirituality. What I mean by this, amasiko, usiko, izithethe, and what we call culture is not spirituality. Agreed. But they are expressions that are part of the spirituality of what I termed before as the spirituality that existed long time ago. Now, in simple terms, it means when we do amasiko, that is certain things and traditions that could be imbeleko, that is the welcoming and in introducing the child into ancestors. It's an expression of African spirituality. It could be in Tonjane, that the coming of age from being a
Of a
girl
girl.
to being a woman, that is part of isiko. It could be what Amazulu call umemulo, similar
Memu.
to Intonjana. It could be all of these things, boys coming from initiation school to manhood. That is part of amasiko and traditions. Now, is panda for Zulu people when they introduce someone into amadlos and all of those are expressions. Now,
Yes.
people also have made uktwasa African spirituality, whereas it is a part and an expression of what African spirituality is, because African spirituality, in my view, finds its essence in expressions.
Yes.
However, at the center of it all, we've got God, and God who interacts with cosmology, God who interacts with those who have transcended. And we don't worship ancestors, but we revere them, we acknowledge them as the center that makes this expression more profound and pronounced. So in simple terms, my definition of African spirituality, it's a way of experiencing God within culture, within usigo, within amasigo and traditions. Right in there, there's a strong recognition of God being the center. God who then permeates through those who have transcended to make sense to us. Hence, when they come to us, they come through amatongo, that is dreams, of things that our subconscious mind and what Freud taught me in psychology can never explain. But because of that constant expression and interaction of who God is, they are then able to come to me, which brings you to the point that says that eventually, because this thing into yasekhaya, ngizalelwe emagqirheni, and ngizalelwe kubantu who are prophets, I was not mutually exclusive, that I could not be. I always say to my friends, if there's one thing that my ancestors have done for me, they may not have been physically or financially wealthy, but they've left with a wealth of indigenous knowledge systems and the kind of healing that I am, and the work that I do. So I could have never been solid and affirmed and solid enough that the kind of work that I do, far beyond being a clinical psychologist, that when a patient comes, already I know there's more to just than being it the mind and what I was told. But there's a mind, body, spirit, energy that in my work I can't explain what happens. But with the process of umoya and this African spirituality, African-centered psychology, that is what now helps me, that we've got a strong body of knowledge in psychology. We call it African-centered psychology, that recognizes the place of psychologies that have been practiced in Africa, but particularly as to how do we think about it in South Africa at the moment.
Now, I've been saying yes, because I mean, I'm actually, quite excited to hear another health professional, who seems so grounded and so knowledgeable about this matter. I mean, and I'm going to ask you about, just to come back to explain. Maybe let me just explain a little bit, Uguti. I don't know by default, but I ended up having to do a research for my master's on matters of African spirituality. And this is about 20 years ago. I was bothered by the fact that, these patients that I see, SHR, or that I was seeing SHR, I would give them what I believed was like 5-star, biomedical service. But African thathe ezo pilisi nalo mayeza awabeke ecaleni ayobona ukhohlele esingeni. Or they will start there and then come to me later, or they will actually use them concurrently, so it used to bother me, Uti, does that mean there's something I'm missing, or we are missing as Western doctors? So for my master's, then I decided to do an unconventional topic, which was just looking at what is the prevalence of use of traditional healers by urban blacks, and within that, I wanted them to understand actually, African spirituality. What exactly is African spirituality? And then I came across what is called, the African worldview, yeah, which is basically what you say when is the core. The fact that Africans have always believed in the presence of ukuthi kuno God, but bambiza ngamagama ngamagama, right? And then there are the ancestors, right? You said the guys who have transcended, who once walked earth, right? And then there is us here. And so the ancestors become more like your advocates to God, you know, who have their interest, you know, offsprings and heritage. So therefore, issues the misfortune, issues of health and other things. An African person says there are these people who are supposed to be full-time, looking after my interests. You know, are they on a go slow? And if they are on a go slow, why are they on a go slow so that we can sort it out? Or are they on a strike? If they are on a strike, let's sort it out. But to know whether they're on a go slow or on a strike, you need somebody who can be able to engage with them, which is, you know, a divine healer, for example, So that was my understanding from doing that study. So, and as I've been reading some of the stuff that you are doing, you talk a lot about, when you've just bought a house, after uyibikile funeka uyoyiqinisa, in your article you talk a lot about that, whether it's a house or anything that you are proud of, that you believe it's a gift from God. So now, with everything now that you know, Mr. Siswana, so ndifuna ukwazi ke ngoku, how did you personally know uba I now have an ancestral, or how did the ancestral calling manifest in you? At least we are family noko ningekho mnyama on these matters. In my family, we were very, very dark. Since I understand the land, yet my sister who's a physiotherapist is now a fully fledged divine healer. But in your case, the ancestral calling.
Yeah, from childhood, I used to have a lot of deja vus, and I never understood that deja vus then. I dreamt a lot. But I was quite an odd child. I had also these things where I would wonder a lot in my mind. But when I think about those ruminations lately, it has always been remarkable. I would always have Milambo in my mind, in my imagination. I would always see myself in the ikota, that is the white clay.
Yes.
And I never understood. Only now I kind of fully understood that what was that about. That is what is called umntana wetongo, and that is a chosen child by ancestors. But I've always known also, I'm quite intuitive. I feel a lot.
Yes.
And I'm kind of predictable in some ways of how I see things. But I've always been also drawn to loving people and working with people, but in a more nuanced way that I never understood until I studied psychology. So it is always, but I got ill severely in 2017. I thought I had a nervous breakdown. And
by that time, you were already a clinical psychologist.
Yes. I had thought maybe there was something wrong. I don't know. I thought I'm depressed because I've been working and working and working throughout my career, because to be a psychologist is quite taxing and a lot. So I never took a break of that. All to discover, I went through a full psychiatric evaluation, because my psychiatrist then said, this is not getting any better. So let's admit you. And I was admitted for 3 weeks in a psychiatric hospital. You can imagine a psychologist admitted in a psychiatric ward, where you should be the one that's doing the intake and all of that. But it was what I had to go through. I did EEG, MRIs, all of those neurological kind of diagnostic tools.
From a biomedical sense,
Yes, because my psychiatrist also, she's a Jewish woman, Dr. Eliasov, but she's quite well vested in her mind. She had said, dude, out of my history that I've done with you, you've told me you come from a strong lineage of healers and spirituality. There's just something that does not add up here.
Yes,
But let's first
just hold you there.
Yeah.
Just hold you there. I'm sorry to interject. I when people ask me, but Fundile, why did you think lo muntu lona ingxaki yakhe it's more spiritual? Because many a times I'll just tell somebody who has done something is not adding up from a biomedical point of view. And whenever things don't add up, I think spirituality. And 9 out of 10 times, or even 10 out of 10 times, I'm right. So and I was just coming this psychiatrist things were not adding up from a biomedical point of view.
No.
But at least she had insights, Zogba, when things don't add up, especially with somebody with a strong family history, like the family history that you have on matters of spirituality and actually practicing, clearly, she had that good mind, so I thought I needed to just come in there because it's a very difficult thing for many people but understand. So we are in a way, as we're conversing up, siyafundisa nokufundisa,
Yes. So I then I was diagnosed with traumatic brain injury, mild recurrent ADHD, temporal lobe epilepsy. I was a walking DSM with all of these, all of these
organic brain syndrome.
At some point, the Jige ICU to theater because I was told there's a bleeding hemorrhage as a result of the accident. So it was a lot of things, but at that time there was also an awakening happening.
Yeah.
And this is where now I needed to go on the other side, Muelekai. And then we went to a prophet, and I was told I am gifted, basically, Gunomoya Wetongo, as well as a prophetic gift. The church side of things. It may understand why the interest in theology, as well as the other side. But obviously, because of tensions and growing up and knowing what comes with having to follow this journey and path, it's very difficult. So I kind of went the church way, but the church way didn't really materialize. And out of desperation, I ended up in wrong hands of someone that so-called initiated me. I'm glad I went through that phase, but it didn't go right. And now
it exposes you to the fact that, even within these spaces, there are, charlatans, people who take chances, so you mustn't go in blindly.
So there was over commercialization, there was black magic involved, there are a lot of other things. Then 2021, I really began on a journey of searching myself and doing a lot of work around my lineage, understanding my maternal side, and that's where the gift comes from, and many other things that I've then had to discover. But to answer you, Doc, in simple terms, I was a different child with different way of looking at the world, quite intuitive. But as I grew older, I got to understand that there were a lot of things that were happening that were not making sense. Coming to what you mentioned, to misfortunes. And one person asked me, Anele, why do you have to go through so much hell before you can answer this calling?
Well, it's because you've been ignoring it. And so they turn on the screws, the more you run away, the more they turn on the screws and just make your life a living hell, But you mentioned something very important, Anele, which I want to. You said you have two gifts, spiritual gifts. You've got the gift of a divine healer, that is igqirha ngesixhosa, isangoma ngesizulu, where there is a calling for you, and it's more about the African traditional way of diagnosing issues and then intervening. But basically, it's about you having the ability, to allow your ancestors to be able to engage with the ancestors of your patient through you, for you to be able to make a diagnosis. Ayenziwa nguwe really, yenziwa ngabo, but through you. Am I right?
Correct.
Yes, and then so when you are being trained there after ancestral calling, you are trained ukwazi to engage with them for benze lo msebenzi. But anyway, you are cousin. So you've got that one, the divine healing gift. But you also mentioned that you've got the faith healing side of things, which is, you said, prophecy. And that's usually in these, about prophet. So you therefore need to grow both of those, right? So that you can have to be competent in how you leverage them for the benefit of your patients. So maske siqale ke ngale yesintu, that is the ancestral calling for Baubeli was. So obviously now you knew ukuthi kusoloko different, uyaboniswa nentoni. Did you go to somebody to actually confirm uba indeed une calling? And or because we are with family eyaziyo lento, they guided you through that? Because it's also important about who will be, your principal or Gobela. Sometimes they actually want to do it on their own. Sometimes they will choose somebody to mentor and coach you until you qualify. So in your case,
yeah, at home they knew, they helped me where they could.
Yeah.
But because of my desperation, I suppose, and my impulsivity, and knowing that this world is quite volatile, I ended up in wrong hands.
Yes.
She might have been a good person personally from her side, but she developed a lot of jealousy and it went bad.
Because they have the ability to see how big the gift is.
Yes,
and some exactly. of them, because they can see how much the gift that you have, how gifted you are, then they want to appropriate some of that for their own personal benefit. And therefore they start doing things that are not what is expected of them, but they do it. And they are veering away because you are called to be a healer, right? To heal. Once you do something else which is not healing, then we are tagged.
Yeah, I was at the verge of being umtarat. I was taught everything to do with dark magic as opposed to healing and light work. But by God's grace and my ancestors, I was taken out of that.
But now they talk to you and say you are in the wrong place.
That's what I was told. I would dream bad things until I needed to go home again. And I told my elders, this is what is happening, until I was led to someone who, what I realized, and this is important, Dr. Nyati, that Uktwasa has a lot to do with your lineage.
Yes.
Uktwasa has a lot to do, even Mumkosa.
Yeah.
You have to go to Igriha for a clear diagnosis and the right process. Because in Johannesburg, I realized from my experience and what I've seen with other people that I've interacted with, and some have been my patients, out of desperation, they ended up in wrong hands, that if you are a Xhosa, go to a Xhosa to find the right answers of your lineages, and to be trained in the right way. If you are Zulu, chances are you are likely to be a Sangoma. If unenkenke, unobizo, lobugqirha kwaXhosa, you can never be initiated by a Sangoma. And this is where I'm at now, that my people are doing it themselves now. And this year, I'm going to then fully start all over again to do the right processes of what is required by Amatongo Army so that things can be aligned. Because at the time when I was a Petroni, things went bad. I felt like I was losing it to a point of being suicidal because there was a lot of things that didn't go right. And there's a lot of misalignment with myself. And so now what I then need to do will be a matter of aligning myself and the gift.
Yeah. And those who have given you the gift, they have a responsibility to also channel you to the right person or persons
Exactly.
who will harness that gift for you to be able to do their work. And clearly, whoever that you had gone to, for whatever reason you chose that person, was not the right person. And other people say you need to partner to your people so that they show up.
But also the other thing is
who is supposed to actually help you to grow.
The other thing is, even the person that is helping you, they may make you dream of them and think that it's them that need to do the process.
Yeah.
And that's what happened to me.
Yes, you see now. So, but anyway, sometimes you go through that detour because there are certain insights and experiences of Nuku's Fundi. You know, I mean, my sister only completed, this is almost after a 10-year period, having gone through Okobela by 4.
Yeah.
You know? So, but now that she knows the good side and not so good side, she knows what she needs to do and what she doesn't, as she's the Kobela herself now. Yeah, so what I'm trying to say, sometimes as a dito one you so to right. Actually, they are part of your gene for Ruba, to efika kuwe obedlule from that kind of journey. Because you yourself have got experience of when things didn't go right, or when your principal actually decided to want to steal some of your gifts. But anyway, let's not scare people around this matter. Let's not scare abantu. But the point is, you underwent ukutwasa. Now what I want to know, lapha mosxa sowugqibile unalo igama walinikwayo ngabantu bakho, because they're supposed to give you a name, like my sister Mahlala Entabeni, that's the name abamnikeza lona, so ugogo Mahlala Entabeni, so they have not come up uba bamnikeza uba ngubani igama lapha, because indlela yokubahlonipha, especially lo muntu okunikeza igift.
All was done in void.
Wow. So you have to start afresh.
Yes. But the most important thing that Dr. Nedela found, the gift, I've not lost touch with it.
Yes.
In fact, it's more enhanced now that it's natural and very organic. Whereas when you go to a patron, they channel your gift to look a certain way. But now I'm able to see I don't need bones. I don't need all of those aesthetics for me to be able to connect. And that's where I'm at. All that I have to do now is to align things that I have to do, not to inspire the gift, but to enhance what is already there.
Yeah, that's good. All right. So anyway, so you have to start the process afresh.
Yes.
I think that's the most important thing. But so fumene apo kwamba uyekona.
Yes, and it has to do nekai. It's a lot of to do with it with lineage.
Beautiful.
And yes, tongela manje, yes, pupela, everything there is, so I'm fine.
You're good. You're good. Now, the part you're about clinical psychologist, the part you're about clinical psychologist. How do you now navigate? Because when I was reading the article that you sent me, I haven't been to your practice, but you say we practice Yako the way oyenze ngayo, ingathi uyindumba, and ulayita impepho, payana, and so people sometimes, just because of the space abangena kuso, funeka bakhulule izihlangu bathini, the way you normally do xa uyobona a traditional healer. So how do you navigate the two? You're a clinical psychologist on one side, as a clinical psychologist, but you also have this other gift. Again, do you see them as separate? Do you see them as things that can integrate?
No, thanks God to intersectionality by Crenshaw, who suggests that there's never a single identity, there are multiple identities. There are crossroads that lead to the same path. And with intersectionality, I've been able to understand the place of space, context, and context, it being a psychologist, being a healer, being queer, all of these variants of that makes me who am I. But I've then found space of holding all of these crossroads to make sense to me and to those that I work with. So the thing about being a clinical psychologist, I'm very clear. Everything that I am as a clinician is that of a psychologist. I went through the training for what it is, and I'm registered as an independent psychologist. So everything that I do, HPCSA, our Health and Professions Council, is here. And I know exactly what they want, and I stick to that. But when you talk of identity, drawing from all of these aspects that we spoke about, I can never silence those things when I enter my room.
Yes.
So if we talk of identity, I'm talking about me, the subject that then becomes a holding space for all of this that a psychologist should do. But I've got my own embodiments, as I've expressed, that my sexual orientation, how I dressed, how I look, and the things that I believe in, I hold space for them. And what helps me here is that there's a strong body of knowledge systems and a movement in psychology around African-centered psychology. And right in there, scholars like Professor Kopano-Ratele, Professor Moye, Professor Mkhize, Professor Sodi, Professor Baloyi, and many others.
UKZN.
Yes, UKZN. Professor Moye, and many others, Professor Ramose. They've written so much about African psychology and what it looks like. Now, for me, where I come in, and this is where my doctorate is going to come in, I want to advocate, in fact, to speak about the relevance and place of what it looks like in therapy.
Yes.
We know what theory says, but now of how it looks like in therapy, it's exactly like that. My identity and who am I? I'm American. So you're not going to find a Freudian European couch in my office. The ancestral mat, you're going to find for on my days where I feel like it's not my business. Because why? If you go to a Muslim office, you're going to find expressions and embodiments of Muslim looking like things. Starting from how they dress, a staunch Muslim therapist will wear those dresses.
Yes.
A Jewish therapist will wear that hat. An Indian therapist will have that. An Indian therapist or a Hindu therapist, why, as an African psychologist or as an African therapist, I have to undo or my expressions of who am I. If you go to a Hindu office, you're going to find in Hindu incense. As an African, my incense you're going to find in Bebo. So it's in the interpretation of how you're going to make sense of it. But what helps me at the moment, I've made it very known and clear that my practice is an African-centered driven practice in my website, in the work that I do, in how I dress. So already when people look in my website, sorry about that.
No
when
problem.
people go to my website, already you know what you're looking for.
Yeah.
You're going to look for that and you're going to find it. I do not ask people to take off their shoes, but the command of the space and how my room looks like, it's a bit of modern African traditional space, right? You're going to find shawls that are Makosa shawls in my office, that where my clients sit. You're going to find things that are embodiments of my being as a psychologist, but it appeals to those whom I attract. 90% of my clients are comfortable with that ambience. And for Christians or people who share different faith and different doctrines, when they ask that can this space be neutral, I do that. So I'm very wary of what happens in that space is psychological. I'm very wary whatever tools of assessment that I'm going to use are psychological, but my identity is not divorced from who am I.
Yes. Now, what is the attitude of HPCSA, your board of clinical psychology, as far as, the issue of, I'll say, the Afrocentric psychology and the practice thereof?
HPCSA is not clear in black and white about that. And this is why a number of scholars, and myself included, we are then now doing work of how this looks like in practice, because people are not bold enough to showcase how does this look like in practice. So I have taken upon myself through my embodiments and through my work to say at the end of it all, we both know, Dr. Nyati, SPSA encourages that we do no harm.
Yes.
I see no harm in making my ambience look African.
Yes.
But I see everything beneficial for the kind of clients that say, when they come to my office, can I take off my shoes because I feel comfortable? Can we sit on the floor? Everything is psychological, but it's the client's experience that they want to experience that sitting on the floor.
Yeah. Have you had any situation where you had a client, born again, Christian, staunch, who, for whatever reason, I figure up space I feel so uncomfortable, right? Thank you very much.
I've had two occasions. One is an individual person. The interesting thing of how this patient described it, I heard you are an exceptional and highly recommended therapist, but I wasn't prepared, or I was not told that you practice this thing.
This thing?
Yes, this thing. I had not said anything, but in my room, it's not even that hectic, but I think there was a scent of impeccable.
Yeah.
And I said, you are more than welcome to leave.
Yeah.
On second occasion, one person had come in and I had a candle on, and she asked, what is that candle for? I said, it's for ambience. And she said, I can feel you are a spiritual person. I said, yeah, I am, but African spirituality. And she came for 1 or 2 sessions. The funny part is she went as far as calling her medical aid to withdraw that session because she said it didn't feel like she had gone to a fully fledged psychologist. Yeah. And I then called the medical aid. I said, this is the concept, this is the code, this is my diagnosis in Malia.
Wife man Malia.
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
I had offered
so there's no reason why wife bad. Yeah.
Yeah. And the third one, it was a couple that had came in. The wife was comfortable with my space. The husband was staunch Christian, and they never came back again. But on the other side, because I believe in tradition and culture and all of that, one of these patients was negotiating or is currently negotiating for his term.
Yes.
And he was adamant. He actually fought with me to say, I'm disappointed that you didn't back me up because you consider yourself to be a highly cultural man. I would have thought that you understand the situation better. I said, no,
Mm.
here a psychologist has to understand both sides.
Mm.
So don't bring my views and whatever that I bring to the table as a distraction to the therapeutic process. And he dismissed the process and never came back because I didn't subscribe to his cultural ideologies.
Yes, but I think there's also something else I want you to share. I hope we always talk about African spirituality, like we're talking now, but actually spirituality, it's a universal thing. Indigenous healing happens in China, happens in India, Ayurveda. It happens in South America with shamanic stuff. So, and sometimes people that we define race, or this one is Portuguese or this one is Indian. Some of them may have, for example, some African heritage in their in their DNA or in their genes. So have you had experience of somebody who actually embraces your African spirituality and you're African?
A lot of them. I've got Americans, I've got people across the globe. So that universality, I have experienced it and I'm still experiencing it. That there's more reception and open-mindedness when it comes into the diversity of how I hold space for spirit and the soul in my therapeutic work.
Yeah. Beautiful, beautiful. Now, so obviously we've got people who are listening, and one of the people who's listening or watching is a colleague of yours from MTAD, Uzian. Yeah, very, very good clinical psychologist. I still want her back here for us to talk more about a number of other things. So she made a comment. She said, Siswana, and put 3 hearts, an important voice in the quest to retain the homogeneity of our culture, African ways, a wisdom of wisdoms, and this is coming from a colleague of yours who's practicing as a clinical psychologist, independent clinical psychologist, MTAD. So she's basically saying, thumbs up, you're doing great. You are bringing aspects of psychology, that needs to be elevated so that people can be whole. Your take on that comment?
I admire Uzianda. She does what I call rural psychology. Yes. She's one of those brave people that left this comfort of soft life to really make access a reality for people who are in touch, as much as it could be a kind of a privileged rural space, but her being present in those spaces does shape the trajectory of our profession. Yes. But I believe even our colleagues, they are in search and really yearning for this kind of psychology, because we all deal with patients that we realize that science and the biomedical model doesn't help us enough to make our diagnosis. Yeah. The diagnosis of the people that we work with are quite complex, that you need to do a thorough history to understand even things such as spirituality. When you do a genogram, you become conscious of, is it Dugo, and all of these things, because they shape the psyche of who we are as people. And if something is wrong in the lineage, it means that in your genealogical assessment and all of that, in your genogram, you may have to make other considerations. So, and this year, our congress theme, it's African-centered psychology. So we are really asking, how does this look like in practice?
Beautiful.
And colleagues like Zianda are really contributing to such debates to say, what does this look like? What is this really about? And I am an answer to that. Obviously, it comes with pros and cons.
As a pioneer in anything, there's good and bad. There's some stones that are going to come your way from those who feel that you are contaminating a certain picture, of
I will never have Freud in my office, even as a picture. Dare to say a couch on it. No.
Yes.
Anything that is colonial. This is why we've got a decolonization of psychology.
Yes.
Because it can't look like it used to in the past.
Yes, yeah.
So it has to reflect who we are.
Yeah. So I'm also on a similar type of journey on the biomedical side, for my PhD. So, but this is not my interview. So DSM-5, our Bible of psychiatry. DSM-5, the latest, which was launched, I think, May 2013. So it's been there now for almost 10 years. But there's something unique about it. For the first time, there is a new section in DSM-5 that deals with cultural syndromes. Yeah? Bebeqalile ku DSM the TR4, TR, but culture-bound syndromes.
Yes.
They've now moved further with DSM-5 to now go deeper into cultural syndromes. Yeah. Now, but what is saddening about, what that means is that as a practitioner, you need to understand the cultural context of your patient and understand that some of their presentations may be linked to, issues as when the culture and the spirituality sub. But what saddens me when you go through the cultural syndromes that are listed there, they are largely cultural syndromes from Asia, Far East, South Korea and places like that, South America, but the cultural syndromes there to are like, ancestral calling, for example. They have not yet been defined because we Africans have not researched and published gas syndromes there. Yet, as was God.
Yeah. Now, what's the cultural unspecified syndromes?
Yes, you see. So, a new version of DSM-5 must be much more enriched by the research that is done by people who are on the ground, who are Africans, whether they are medical doctors or psychologists, but we need to contribute because we can't keep on. We know these cultural syndromes are there, but we have not, published so that, they become mainstream, central mainstream in the sense that zikhona phazibhaliwe. Because I saw as Zindaw. So I just wanted to just as we look at wrapping up, we've got 5 minutes to go. I wanted your thoughts around the imperative on Africans to actually do research, publish, so that we can grow the body of knowledge around
on that note, Kenyati, I am of the belief that we need to think and redefine our understanding of science and publication.
Indeed.
That which we are doing is a form of knowledge dissemination.
Yes.
That is technological.
Yes.
The West has done so much of policing of knowledge systems, especially the gatekeeping of indigenous knowledge systems.
Yes.
That we have to publish for those knowledges to be accepted as reputable knowledges.
Indeed.
Now, if we're going to talk text publications that are the ones that we talk of, international journals, we talk of local journals, it's still going to be a long way to go for us. Hence, I have opted for text-based, such as opinion pieces on reputable newspapers, on reputable magazines, like the one that I shared with you yesterday. It's from America, the Spirit Guide, right? So in the moment of us doing bigger projects, our doctorates, Zianda herself is doing a beautiful study on assessments for young children. That data is data that it will be credible after her doctoral study.
Yes.
But in the process of that, it's people like Zeno can probably write short opinion pieces to really help us start thinking about these realities. My doctoral work now that I'm going to start focusing more next year looks at what's the fine line of uktwasa, or we can call it ingulu yabantu abadala in psychopathology.
Yes.
How do we really get to define that conundrum? Because there are people who have gone to Ephelweni and still come back mentally ill.
Yeah.
So to what extent can we empower healers with they may not use the DSM, but how do we empower them to understand what is it that to look for so as to come to that fine line, as well as psychologists? Hence, my participants is going to be psychologists who operate from a psychological perspective of recognizing umoya, the spirit, and that African world, as well as amagqirha specifically in this 10K, because I really want to understand how do we make sense of these nuances when someone also does not need to go to a Ephelweni, but they need to be treated psychiatrically for them to get better. But we can only get to those conclusions when we have done significant, beautiful studies that can help us with such findings as to being able to do that. So where the DSM is at the moment, it is helpful for us to think about, but we then need to contextualize in a South African context as to what are the major leading kind of disorders that we may need to consider as culture bound.
Yes. All right. And then my last question to you. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time. We're supposed to end now at 5:30. But my last question to you: African spirituality, sexual orientation. I mean, you are somebody who's comfortable. You mentioned in the very article again the intersectionality and whatever of religion, spirituality, identity, and sexual orientation. There's people who, when they look at who has a different sexual orientation, they say no, an African, this thing is un-African, and we live in a country with a certain constitution that actually forbids discrimination on matters of sexual orientation, culture, and all of those things. So just your quick one. You will come one day, but just your closing remarks, but specifically looking at African spirituality and matters of gender, sexual orientation, and the level of discrimination and stigmatization of people just based on their orientation.
Well, I want to say there is nothing un-African about being gay or being homosexual. Basically, African non-normative experiences that suggest there were people who were non-heterosexual back in ancient days. It's just that there was no naming of it. But check of it of how time has evolved, we've got names that we use to define and name people who are not heterosexual. So which means it has always been there. The only problem is that culture and traditions are things that have been termed or kind of constructed as realities that are for heterosexual people only. Now, part of these statements that being gay is un-African, it's people who are policing non-normative sexualities. Basically, it's kind of homophobic, straight, heterosexual people that use these terms so that it doesn't contaminate what probably looks like African. But it's a topic for another day.
Now, I'm going to invite you for us to zoom into that topic, because this month was about heritage. I wanted us to just zoom in into matters of African spirituality. I wanted us to zoom in into your ability, to integrate the conventional clinical psychology side of you and, the part of Baui divine healer. So so the other part or the other topic, which is a big topic on its own, we need to find another day. But thank you very much, Anele, for availing yourself just to share. I know Upumile to go and just distress over the weekend. And in a way, I kept on interrupting you there as you were having a quiet time to try and distress. But I hope I didn't disrupt you, Gakuru. But thank you very much, man, for agreeing to just come in and just share your thoughts. You know, you are busy with many things. You are also in academia as well, on top of une practice yako. So you're doing a lot here. You're doing radio shows, you are doing TV shows, you know, and I look up to you, you know, in terms of some of the things that we are doing, especially in this space. So thank you very much. We are honored, you know, that you agreed to be our first guest during this Heritage Month. And this is definitely not the last time that we are having you as our guest. Kamaku. Thank you very much to everyone who joined us. Thank you, you know, thank you, Kakulu, Zianda. You know, it means a lot to have somebody like you actually connecting and following a conversation, you know, that other people may see as a controversial kind of conversation, because we as Africans are not yet comfortable with actually, you know, being authentic about who we are, you know, and our belief systems, our practices and everything. So, but this month, I will be focusing solely on things that have to do with heritage here too, especially as Black people. So thank you for joining us. And this conversation is going to be available on YouTube, so that if you want to listen to it again or share it with somebody else, feel free to go to Dr. Fundi YouTube channel, and then you can be able to access it there. But also on Facebook, my official page, it's also available. And so let's continue talking about the things that are very important to us as African people. Thank you very much, and thank you, Anele.
Thank you so much.
Bye.